شمس المشرق بتدفي شمس
Palestine's got punk on Monday anyway, aren't we? So we're going to see Parliament on Monday anyway. We're going to see Parliament again on Monday anyway. Yes. And he'll probably remember, you two left early, didn't you? Send me. What? It's got some charity club. Yeah, we should do it. So it's the program fundraising.
شمس المغرب شمس المشرق بتدفي، شمس المغرب والعالي، شمس المشرق بتدفي، شمس المغرب والعالي. وأنا ما بعرف من الشمس إلا شمس الأغاني، ما بعرف شمس فلسطين ولا شروق الشمس بيافا. قاعد ارسم صورة شمس بجرب هزها من كتافها، وعيها وإلا شمسي شمسي. بحلم بالعودة عبلادي، اسمه جسمي عالبيارات. بحلم بالعودة عبلادي، بحلم افلت خيطان الطيارات. كتير علي يكون بغرفة كتير فيها شباك، فيها شرفي وسقفي. عالبيري وعلى ام الفحم. الله الله يبارك اهلي وناسي بحيفا وببيت لحم. الله 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 عالبيري وعلى ام الفحم. الله الله يبارك اهلي وناسي بحيفا وببيت لحم. الله 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 شمس المشرق
Take it around the bank holiday.
شمس المغرب والعالم
No, I can't take the pilot.
شمس المشرق بتدفي شمس المغرب والعالم أنا ما بعرف من الشمس إلا شمس الأغاني ما بعرف شمس فلسطين ولا شروق الشمس بيافا قاعد ارسم صورة شمس وجرب هزها من كتافها وعيها وإلا شمسي شمسي ارسم صورة شمس وجرب هزها من كتافها وعيها وإلا شمسي شمسي ارسم صورة شمس وجرب هزها من كتافها وعيها وإلا شمسي شمسي
Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the Palestine national anthem. The hopes are The hopes are Now, I thought to myself, we do not that took place in the leading refugee camp in April 2002, first the foreign correspondent, and then working for the United Nations. I saw what was happening to Palestinians on a daily basis in the West Bank. I visited, destroyed, still deserted towns in the occupied Palestine. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians cost around 15,000 lives, mass atrocities, massacres. Now, I thought to myself, 1957 and 1949, some 530 Palestinian refugees were destroyed. First the foreign correspondent, and then working for the United Nations. I saw what was happening to Palestinians. So, they all of their camp and the Palestinian stories, but their families and those who suffer. But I now ask, when the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians cost around 15,000 lives, mass atrocities, massacres. Now, I thought to myself, 1957 and 1949, some 530 Palestinian refugees were destroyed. Thank you very much. So, they all of their camp and the Palestinian stories for their families and those who suffer. I now ask, when the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians cost around 15,000 lives, mass atrocities, massacres. Now, I thought to myself, 1957,
Nakba means catastrophe or disaster, but the English translation does not fully capture the sense of total loss that the Arabic word denotes. There is no other way to describe what happened to the Palestinian people in 1947-49, which left the majority destitute and stateless. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration. Promising a national home in Palestine for Jews, the declaration was drawn up before Britain had come into colonial possession of the land. It was drawn up without consultation with or consideration for Palestine's native population. It would have far-reaching consequences that are still with us today. None was greater than the Nakba, when Zionist forces began a campaign of ethnic cleansing that would eventually see hundreds of towns and villages destroyed, thousands killed, and hundreds of thousands dispossessed, dislodged, and exiled. It is impossible to overestimate the centrality of the Nakba in the Palestinian experience. Historically, Palestine was a mostly agricultural population, but it also boasted a number of significant cities with trade links to the rest of the region and beyond. There were the coastal cities of Jaffa, Haifa, and Gaza, the manufacturing and industrial cities of Nablus and Al-Khalil, the cultural and religious hub of Jerusalem, and the agricultural heartlands of the Galilee, Jenin, and the Jordan Valley. Palestine was a cultivated long before the Zionists on it. In 1939, the British colonial authorities were the coastal cities of Jewish migration from Europe only after a 3-year Palestinian revolt that had been brutally suppressed. In 1947, the UN proposed the partition plan that would have left Palestinians with less than half the territory of historic Palestine. At the time, Jews constituted under a third of the total population and owned just 6% of the land. In 1939, Dalet, the British colonialist blueprint for the Nakba that was ultimately implemented. This was a plan for military offensives across Palestine that included provisions for the transfer of the native population, openly discussed by Zionist leaders to ensure a Jewish majority on the land. The Nakba marked the wholesale disruption of the Palestinian people and their history. Massacres in villages such as Deir Yassin, Lifta, Tantura, and others terrorized the local population. Thousands were physically forced out, put on buses at gunpoint, or worse. The Lid Death March saw some 70,000 Palestinians expelled on foot from Lid and Ar-Ramle, with hundreds succumbing to thirst and fatigue on the way. By the end, between 750,000 to 1 million Palestinians, some 3/4 of the total population, were displaced. None were allowed to return. In 1950, Israel passed the Absentees Property Law that allowed the new state to seize the properties for all those who were forced to flee to neighboring states. Their dispossession was complete. Today, there are some 6 million refugees scattered around the region in camps under the administration of the UN's Relief and Works Agency. Their fates, like the fate of Palestine, remain unresolved. The Nakba is a grave injustice for which there has been no redress. It remains an open wound to this day, and it is still ongoing. Israel's never-ending settlement project in occupied territory continues to squeeze Palestinians off their land. There will be no resolution to the Palestine issue unless the issue of refugees is resolved in accordance with international law. International law is clear on the matter. All refugees have the right to return to their homes and receive compensation for their material losses. Only then can we begin to heal our collective generational trauma.
It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Hussam Zomlot, Palestinian Ambassador to the United Kingdom.
Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Honourable Members of Parliament, Honourable Mayors, Councillors, Community Leaders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us on this somber occasion. I am humbled to see so many here for the 75th commemoration of the Nakba. I appreciate that your attendance alone is a statement of solidarity and recognition of our collective pain. For this, I thank you. Allow me also to express my gratitude to the many people involved in putting together this evening's historic commemoration, from the Palestinian institutions back home to our very devoted team at the Palestinian Mission here, who have worked tirelessly, as well as our very cherished Palestinian community in the United Kingdom. Also, my appreciation goes to tonight's speakers and artists. I thank you for giving up your time and efforts, and you being serious about further knowledge of this immense and ongoing injustice. Without a firm understanding of the Nakba, and without redressing the grave injustice it spelled for the people of Palestine, there is no hope for a just solution, my friends. And without justice, there can be no peace. So, my friends, one day, when I was a young boy, my father took me by the hand. He had bought his first car and wanted to take his father and his oldest son, the 3 generations of the Nakba, to come on the maiden journey with him. I did not know where we were going, but after a short drive, maybe 45 minutes or so, we stopped. All we saw were ruins. And I wondered why we had come until my grandfather explained that this was what was left of our village, Simsim, to the very north of Gaza. In 1948, my grandparents were forced out of Simsim due to the advance of Zionist militias who were acting without restraint, engaging in massacres across Palestine. At the time, my father had been a toddler. He was carried in my grandmother's arms, tied to her chest, so she could hold his siblings. My family headed south, but stopped before leaving the country at my grandfather's insistence. I was born in a Rafah refugee camp in the most southern part of Palestine. I grew up in a Rafah refugee camp. I was educated by UNRWA with a tin roof and barely enough tables and chairs. Our visit to Simsim, my friends, distinguished guests, was my grandfather's first visit back. And with the village demolished completely and overgrown, it was unrecognizable to him until he found a tree that used to stand by their house. A fig tree, I remember it vividly, as it is now. That was how he remembered where his home, where our home had once stood. Now, for those who have not experienced the loss of home, the loss of country, it may be hard to fully comprehend just how traumatic such an event is. In my grandfather, that trauma left him able to describe everything in the village like it had been yesterday. That trauma dictated that my grandfather chose Simsim as the destination for his first journey. My father chose Simsim as his first destination for his first journey in our much prized new car, first car. And he chose to take me, to show me, to remind me. To me, with my child's logic, there were so many questions that moment. Why are only 40 minutes away? Are we really only 45 minutes away from the refugee camp to our original home? That was the child's thinking. Why can't we stay? I was thinking. Why can't we just stay? Why can't we rebuild? Why can this be right? And how can this be right? Today, with an adult's logic, all these years later, I ask myself the same questions. How is it that this has been allowed to fester unaddressed for so long? Why, when international law and common human decency is very clear on the matter, are there still 6 million Palestinian refugees today scattered around occupied Palestine and the region, stateless, destitute, and able to enjoy only limited rights? This cannot be right, ladies and gentlemen. I tell you this because I hope we all understand this is not just my story. The Nakba is a trauma central to the Palestinian identity and collective experience. This is our story. It is a trauma around which our cause is based, premised. The Palestinian struggle for self-determination began long before the Nakba, but correcting the injustice inflicted during the Nakba is of fundamental importance to every Palestinian. Our struggle is indeed for justice and redress. Our struggle is that the rules that ought to apply to all peoples of this world apply equally to us. The right of refugees to return to their homeland and to receive compensation for their losses. Our struggle is to secure our internationally sanctioned human, political, and national rights in a sovereign and independent state of Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital, at long last. Only once these issues are addressed can we begin to heal. It's been 75 years, my friends. Sadly, with Israel's ever-expanding illegal colonial settlements project in occupied territory, the Nakba is ongoing. People are still being displaced, are still being killed, are still being arbitrarily detained, are still being made homeless, are still being forced off their land. Israel is still acting with extreme prejudice and impunity, as we have seen yet again this very week in Gaza and the rest of Palestine. Shamefully, the world is still standing by, allowing this to continue. And yet, the United Nations will this year recognize the centrality of the Nakba and its unaddressed consequences for the Palestinian people and our region over the many decades that have passed since. This is a step forward. Every UK government in London, in Cardiff, in Edinburgh will mark the Nakba next week. This is a step forward. Recognizing the centrality and injustice of the Nakba is a necessary step, especially here in Britain, where it all started. But it is not just a beginning. There must be accountability for Israel. It must be based on justice and law. There must not be another 75 years of Nakba. My predecessor and inspiration, actually, His Excellency Ambassador Afif Safieh, who I'm very proud and touched that he's among here, did lead a commemoration of 50 years of Nakba here in the UK when he was ambassador. Now I am his successor commemorating 75th anniversary commemoration of the Nakba. I hope our successors will not have to do the same. We, the Palestinian people, will not relent, my friends. We will not relent in our struggle. And we know you in this very iconic hall that hosted the first UN General Assembly, and the millions of the freedom-loving people in the UK and worldwide. We know we will stay. You will stay with us for the duration of this long journey to freedom. With steadfastness, and our people are showing the greatest deal of steadfastness, with goodwill, with solidarity, and with understanding, we will get there, my friends. Then, by then, I might be able to take my children by their hands and show them a more hopeful and peaceful future. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for that very moving and poignant speech. The Ambassador mentioned, we've mentioned that this hall is where the first meeting of the UN General Assembly took place in 1946. And so it is apposite that our next speaker is Francesca Albanese, who is the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, who's bravely been carrying out her mandate, a mandate given to her by the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. Francesca.
Good evening, distinguished guests, excellencies, and honorable members of Parliament. I would like to express my gratitude, first and foremost, to the Palestinian Embassy in the United Kingdom and Ambassador Zomlot in particular for organizing this important event and for inviting me. As we gather to discuss and commemorate the Nakba, a tragically defining moment for the Palestinian people, I'm aware of the limited scope of my mandate, which was conferred to me not by the Secretary General, by the Human Rights Council last year. Okay, I forgive you. And it focuses on what remains of historical Palestine, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, in the shadow of the never-healed injustice that had befallen Palestine and its people. The British mandate has innumerable responsibilities, along with the United Nations, in fact, not just for being there during the Nakba, but for enabling the circumstances that made the Nakba possible. And this warrants reflection and action. It's certainly a positive development that this year, for the first time, the United Nations has called for the commemoration of the Nakba, at a tragic moment for the Palestinians under the yoke of occupation, a 56-year-old occupation, underscoring the importance of both the present and the past in order to move forward. While commemorating the Nakba, particularly in this country, may lead to think primarily of United Kingdom's historical responsibilities, I want to reflect, in fact, by virtue of my mandate, on the United Kingdom's current role and responsibility or irresponsibility vis-à-vis Israel and Palestine and the disparaging state of affairs in that tormented land. The United Kingdom, not differently from other European countries and Western states in general, still plays an influential role in Middle Eastern politics, but not for the better, and certainly not for justice. How can we expect that this country acknowledges and makes amends for its past wrongs while it's still unwilling to deal with the current injustices and with the current wrongdoings, which are evident in the lack of a principled intervention on the question of Palestine? Today, the prevailing climate in the occupied Palestinian territory continues to be of widespread and systemic violence, maintained through an occupation under the pretense of security, which is there just to protect and expand the colonies that over 56 years have grown from 0 to 270, with a population which has grown from 0 to 720,000. Israeli government's policies and the inertia of the international community have worsened the situation, granting impunity to Israel and its army and settlers. In this context, apartheid the word that many in this room might still struggle to even pronounce, is a crime, but it's also the unavoidable, the organic consequence of a regime of suprematism that even Israel itself does not hide anymore. So in this respect, the recently unveiled UK-Israel 2030 roadmap, the commercial agreements that the United Kingdom maintains with Israel, and even the recent proposals to ban activities calling for sanctions and divestment vis-à-vis Israel, send really the wrong signal to a country like Israel at a moment of heightened repression of the Palestinian people, the defenseless Palestinian people under occupation. And let me say, similarly shocking, I find the silencing the debate mode that has besieged even universities in this country, places of free thinking turned into corners of obscurantism. Here, scrutiny of Israel, like any other country who commit gross human rights violations, is met with censorship, and worse, with self-censorship, which I say is like censorship, just uglier, to avoid and evade spurious anti-Semitism labels. This climate serves only to stifle legitimate debate, which is essential to move forward peacefully and respectfully. As a possible way out, and since the beginning of my mandate, I've been calling for a paradigm shift in the way the international community deals with Israel and Palestine, where international law, respect for international law, is a precondition for any possible solution, let alone a negotiated one. Because international law, it's as strong as the will of states to respect it and to enforce it, and only this will make the regulatory and the remedial function since the beginning of law meaningful. What does it mean in practice? First of all, abandoning humanitarianism, treating the question of Palestine as a humanitarian crisis to solve instead of a political quagmire to resolve in line with human rights standards. And also, what's the purpose of proposing political negotiations devoid of human rights guarantees or economic solutions devoid of basic respect for dignity of human beings? The right of self-determination must be the sine qua non condition for any meaningful peace agreement. And let me be very clear on that, because I've been engaging with this right from the very beginning of my mandate. It's not complicated. It's a very fundamental right that in the case of Palestine, even preceded the codification of the right as a universal human rights for everyone. It was recognized by the League of Nations to the people of Palestine and still is unmet. The second element that I stress is that a cessation of violations and, if necessary, political, economic countermeasures to induce respect for international law must be embedded in the application of any solution. And third, justice, guarantees of non-repetition, and reparations for the crimes perpetrated so far is a must. This should be the agenda for any future roadmap with Israel. And this is going to be in the interest of the Palestinians and the Israelis alike, because the system that Israel maintains corrupts and corrodes both the Palestinians and the Israelis who administer such a vicious occupation. And in conclusion, as a leading nation in international relations, and given its past, the United Kingdom should embrace the Nakba as a past and a current issue, and embark on a new, principled approach that starts with undoing the present as a form of atonement for what has been done to the Palestinian for the past 100 years.
Thank you very much indeed, Francesca. I now have great pleasure in inviting Ayad, who's a Palestinian classic pianist from Jaffa and Khalil, and Iyad's going to play Helen Otte's Levantina. Iyad is here. Here's Iyad. think there were a few encores there. Thank you very much, Jed. Fantastic. We're joined this evening by representatives from the main British political parties. Delighted to have them here. And I'm going to introduce them collectively and then ask them to just follow one another up, if that's all right, rather than introduce them all separately. We have here this evening the Right Honourable Crispin Blunt. He is a member of the Conservative Party and he's been Member of Parliament for Reigate since 1997. He was the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Prisons and Youth Justice within the Ministry of Justice from 2010 to 2012 and Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee from 2015 until 2017. And Crispin is a former Joint Chair of the Council for the Advancement of Arab-British Understanding. We also have Right Honourable Bambos Charalambos. Bambos is a British Labour Party politician and is serving as the Member of Parliament for Enfield Southgate in London, and he's been MP. I think he was elected on the third election in 2017, and he's the Shadow Minister for the Middle East and North Africa under Sir Keir Starmer's leadership since 2021. We have also Right Honourable Layla Moran. Layla is the Liberal Democratic Party spokesperson for Foreign Affairs and International Development since 2020 and serves as the Member of Parliament for Oxford West and Abingdon. And finally, we have Right Honourable Brendan O'Hara. And Brendan was elected Member of Parliament for the Scottish National Party and for the constituency of Argyll and Bute in 2015. And Brendan's been the SNP spokesperson for international development since December 2022. He served as the SNP's digital culture, media and sport spokesperson from 2017 to 2018 and as the SNP's defence spokesperson from 2015 to 2017. Welcome to you all. Could I please ask Crispin to come up first?
I am deeply honoured by the invitation of the Palestinian diplomatic representatives to the Court of St James to speak for my party on this sombre anniversary. Given recent events, I can't say I'm surprised he hasn't invited a member of His Majesty's government. And I appreciate our friendship, which means we can be wholly straightforward with each other. It's 40 years since I first visited Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. That visit, made as a tourist, political student, and serving soldier, presented me with the undeniable evidence of the unresolved dispossession of an entire people from 4/5 of their original territory. Jerusalem, the occupied Golan Heights, the empty ruins of former Palestinian villages in northern Israel painted the picture of what I saw. But the background to this visit were the massacres at Sabra and Shatila, which provided the current affairs background of the day. 35 years of catastrophe was no exaggeration then. Of course, the greatest crime in human history was the current affairs background to the start of the Nakba. The Shoah, or Holocaust, had ended in just 1945. Centuries of hate and exclusion in Europe towards their Jewish populations all contributed to Nazi Germany being able to murder Jews with pitiless industrial efficiency. But it was 30 years ago when I was with Malcolm Rifkin, the first British Defence Secretary to visit Israel. In human history was the current affairs. Part of his programme was to deliver the annual Shoah or Holocaust had ended. The occasion was a proper tribute to Yitzhak Rabin, whose commitment to peace of hate and exclusion in Europe towards their Jewish populations all contributed. Now, it is certainly true we did not focus enough on the undelivered half of the Balfour Declaration. But finally, it was 30 years ago when I was with Malcolm Rifkin, the first British Defence Secretary to visit Israel in history was the current part of his programme was to deliver the annual Shoah or Holocaust had ended. The occasion was a proper tribute to Yitzhak Rabin, whose commitment to peace of hate had found. In 1996, Malcolm Rifkin, now the Foreign Secretary, all contributed. Now, it is certainly true we did not focus enough on the undelivered pitiless of the Balfour. I entered Parliament as a young opposition MP. But finally, I made many visits to Israel and I was with Malcolm Rifkin, the first British Defence Secretary with the all-party parliamentary Palestine programme, the Conservative Middle East Council, the Council for Advancement of Identity. The occasion was a proper tribute to Yitzhak Rabin, with forward-thinking, and perhaps most esoterically of all, with the Lords and Commons cricket team. In 2002, I met the most impressive Diana Bhuttu and other brilliant young telegenic English-speaking Palestinian authority, paid by our Department for International Development to work for the Negotiation Support Unit for the Palestinian Authority. By then, of course, the wall was planned and a separation that has, in practice, dashed the hopes of Oslo and Madrid was in train. Since then, the settlements have continued apace. And it was 10 years ago that William Hague warned that that meant the two-state solution was now in the last chance saloon. 10 years on, those settlements continue today. And the language of the British government's condemnation is tragically identical to that used by Malcolm Rifkin 25 years ago. No hint of a price to be paid for driving a coach and horses through the forced Geneva Convention, one of the treaties that underpins the laws of war and was meant to be the basis on which the horrendous crimes of the Second World War, inflicted in vast numbers on civilians, did not happen again. As a Conservative, I am of course ashamed of the collective record over all this period. I'm sustained by the wonderful friendship and understanding of people like Hussam Zomlot and the raw courage of Palestinians, whether in refugee camps, Gaza, displaced in Lebanon or Jordan, or elsewhere, scattered around the world in sustaining their national struggle. I will do my best to ensure my government is held to account, not least for its embarrassing latest deal with Israel, which ignores my country's and my party's fundamental values around freedom, justice, and the rule of law. But on this grim 75th anniversary of an ongoing catastrophe, I urge Palestinians to take your fate into your own hands. Find a national strategy that uses your legal and moral authority. And I believe when you do, the shame I feel will begin to be the dominant emotion of all those engaged in negotiating with you. Take the high ground. Be proud of your achievements, despite the horror of the existence daily of so many. It's why, with a human rights lawyer, I've set up a law centre, the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, to use that moral and legal authority in your quest for justice. It is usually darkest before the dawn. And I believe that more and more of the global Jewish community, as well as in Israel itself, are very far from proud of their Jewish state. And even in the Conservative Party, it has been possible for my wonderful colleague, Baroness Saida Varsi, to find 38 parliamentarians to join her new group, the Conservative Friends of Palestine. There are a surprising number of us. We are with you because right is on your side. And in the end, the common values of humanity must prevail.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening and to be invited by my friend Hussam and to speak here on behalf of the Labour Party. And Hussam, your speech was incredibly moving. Your personal accounts really hit home about the impact of the Nakba on Palestinian people. This year, we mark 75 years since what is known by the Palestinians as the Nakba, or catastrophe, and the mass displacement of Palestinians, with over 5 million Palestinian refugees living across the Middle East today. And it is an opportunity to share my commitment once again as the Shadow Minister for the Middle East and North Africa, to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people and continue our efforts towards the realization of Palestinian rights and a Palestinian state, which is key to creating a just and peaceful future for both Palestinians and Israelis. Labour is wholeheartedly committed to the right of self-determination for both the Palestinians and the Jewish people, and that must mean 2 states for 2 peoples. But sadly today, a vision of peaceful future looks like a distant hope. It has been utterly tragic to witness the escalation of violence in recent months, and yet more Palestinian and Israeli lives lost. This week, we've seen civilians once again paying a terrible price, with Palestinian civilians killed in airstrikes and hundreds of rockets fired at the Israeli civilians. This cycle of violence only leads us further away from the path to a lasting peace. I believe every Palestinian and Israeli deserves a just solution to this conflict, but we cannot deny the ongoing occupation of the Palestinian territories and its impact on human rights protections for Palestinians. We must not shy away from naming the occupation as an obstacle to peace. I have done so and will continue to do so, and oppose all actions which make peace harder to achieve. The continued enforcement of the occupation has meant Palestinians have been subject to home demolitions, forced displacement, settler violence, movement restrictions, arbitrary detention, and systemic discrimination. And Gaza has been subject to a punishing blockade for 16 years, which has contributed to a humanitarian and health crisis. I have seen the impact of this firsthand, including when visiting West Bank and East Jerusalem last year. And it's why I strongly believe it will not be a just and lasting peace until the occupation is brought to a permanent end and both Palestinians and Israelis enjoy security, dignity, and human rights. And as the occupying power, Israel must comply with its obligations under international law. But as we know, since the formation of the new Israeli coalition government led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, alongside extreme far-right elements, there have been a renewed assault on the rights of Palestinians, a ramping up of inflammatory rhetoric and dangerous new moves to try to legitimize illegal settlements, threatening the viability of a 2-state solution. The Labour Party will continue to be a strong and consistent advocates for justice, human rights, and international law in this conflict. And I'd like to end by reiterating our steadfast commitment to a negotiated diplomatic settlement based on 2 states, a thriving and sovereign Palestine state alongside a safe and secure Israel. We believe there can be no viable peace settlement without a Palestinian state. To respect and honour the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, they must have a viable, sovereign, democratic state of their own. Justice, human rights, more than a decade, and international law in this conflict, consistently supported, and I'd like to end recognising a Palestinian statehood as part of continuing steps to achieve a comprehensive 2-state solution. We believe statehood for the Palestinians is not a gift to be given, but a right to be recognised. And as we reflect on 75 years, the UK's historic and moral obligations remain clear. We have a duty to do all we can to foster peace, the rule of international law, and the sanctity of human rights. Thank you.
Marhaba. Thank you, Your Excellencies, honoured guests, and friends, for welcoming me here today. It is an honour, of course, to speak as a Liberal Democrat and our Foreign Affairs spokesperson, but more from my personal perspective as a British Palestinian. My mother comes from an old Greek Orthodox Jerusalem family. We are proud Jerusalemites and we are proud Palestinians. My grandfather, Wasif Jawhariya, chronicled what life was like in Jerusalem from 1918 onwards in unique diaries that are now used by historians as source material. And in them, he told of a Jerusalem where Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived side by side in friendship and with respect. But those friendships were shattered through the Nakba. And like so many, we had to flee our beloved city. My grandfather George, Wasif's son, spoke of how when he was a boy, after the bombing of the King David Hotel, the family left Jerusalem to seek sanctuary in the Mount of Temptation in Jericho, and they lived there for 6 months. Before they left, he spent the last of his pocket money on a Palestinian flag to drape over the door, so that when the Arab armies came to liberate them, they knew that that was a Palestinian house. They entered that monastery, expecting, of course, to soon return to Jerusalem. But as the harsh reality set in, and the Arab armies proved to be nothing but paper tigers, his words, they left the monastery as refugees. And he died a refugee in Athens, in Greece, having rebuilt his life from nothing, first in Jericho and then in Amman. Now, my family's experience is far from unique and far from the worst. The 15th of May marks 75 years since 750,000 Palestinians were driven out of their homes, just like us. And there are now some 6 million Palestinian refugees worldwide. My mother still describes the anguish she feels as a dispossessed Palestinian, and I share that anguish. And so I take it upon myself as the next generation to carry Palestine in my heart and promise to do everything I can to safeguard its future, a future that I fear is in great peril. Now, when the decision was made to partition Palestine in 1947, Wasif said, "Would we see Palestine, particularly the fertile part, become the kingdom of Israel? Could Arabs and Muslims not react to this unjust decision? Without a doubt, we have been wronged." My great-grandfather's words still resonate in me 75 years later, because the Palestinians are still denied a just solution. Our cause is without question, quite simply, a demand for justice, that's all. Now, we cannot pretend that 1948 didn't happen, and no one is suggesting, unfortunately, that we can completely roll back the clock. There has been too much that has happened. Israel does have a right to exist, and so does Palestine. And we could start our search for justice by perhaps pointing out that the painful concessions that the Palestinian made in '67 have largely been ignored. But you just have to look at what's happening now and the dire human rights situation on the ground, because the number of dispossessed grows daily as the far-right Netanyahu government holds up 2 fingers to the international community, daring them to challenge them on the grounds of international law and encourage even more illegal settlements in Palestinian territory. Illegal settlements that the UK continues to trade with. So with their mouths, they condemn them, and with their hands, they nourish them. What breathtaking hypocrisy. The UK trade with illegal settlements is shameful, it's corrosive, and it must stop. And it isn't just trade. All Palestinians have ever asked for is justice according to international law, nothing more and nothing less. The effective silence from the international community makes a mockery of those laws. The UK and our allies need to step up in a real effort to ensure the rights of all peoples, and that includes Palestinian right to self-determination, full political rights, and of course, the right of return. And that is why, every year that I've been elected, I have laid the Palestine Statehood Recognition Bill, because I want the government to remember what part they played, but also that that is the will of Parliament, who have also voted for that. And Palestine's statehood may well be no panacea, but it would send a powerful signal that the UK stands with the Palestinian people. And above all, it would provide some hope to the cynical, the despondent, and the desperate. And on Monday, I will introduce the Nakba Commemoration Bill, which would compel the government to never erase history or forget the role that the UK played in it. Because far too quickly, our government seems to just forget. It was Britain who produced the 1917 Balfour Declaration. And one last quote, if I may, from my dear Wasif. He said, "Britain helped to implement the UN decision. Alas, they considered this to be the final chapter in the story." But far from being the final chapter, it turned out to be the first in a very long book of woes for Palestinians. So today, I call on our government to start a new chapter, to urge them to begin that process of taking accountability for the part they played. And the government doesn't just owe it to Palestinians, but as self-declared guardians of the international rule-based order, I would argue it owes it to us all. It is time that this great wrong be made right, and only hope can punctuate the vicious cycle. So thank you all today in joining together in hope. Shukran.
Thank you very much indeed, and it is a great honour for me to be with you, representing the Scottish National Party at this historic and sombre commemoration, to be here on such an important evening as together we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, when hundreds of Palestinian towns were destroyed, thousands of people were killed, and 750,000 Palestinians were driven into exile. It's humbling, it is truly humbling to be here. The Nakba, the catastrophe, is something which many believed, indeed some fervently hoped, would be forgotten in time. Something that they hoped would pass into history, along with the generations who had to live through the experience and the trauma of being forced from their homes and their land in 1948. But they were wrong. It hasn't been forgotten. And the reason it hasn't been forgotten is simply down to the resilience and the determination of the Palestinian people, who refused to allow it to be forgotten. And that's why we're here today in central London, and that's why tomorrow in Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Canada, United States, Ireland, Scotland, indeed my hometown of Glasgow, and many, many other places across the world, millions will march or stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And they'll be there to remember, because you did not let us forget. But how could anyone ever have imagined that the traumatic events of 1948 could ever have been erased from the collective memory of the Palestinian people? How could the forced removal of almost 1 million people from their land and their homes be forgotten? Particularly when today the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those who were displaced in the Nakba are now growing up and living in the same refugee camps in Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon and Egypt, the same places that their grandparents fled 75 years ago. And so rather than dissipating and easing with time, the memory of the Nakba is understandably both vivid and visceral, and the trauma that was the grandparents 75 years ago has now become the trauma of the grandchildren today. And that means that this cycle of multi-generational trauma is not going to go away. It's not going to disappear. And it will certainly not disappear by the world pretending that it doesn't exist and it's somehow not there. And on this 75th anniversary, the world, the international community, really has to accept its responsibility and really has to begin meaningfully and positively acting to correct the injustice of the Nakba. And that means closer to home in the United Kingdom, that if this United Kingdom government are serious about what they say about wanting to create a cycle to a sovereign, independent, viable Palestine that lives in peace side by side with its neighbours, then they're going to have to do something. But I fear, and as Crispin suggested earlier, this current UK government have very little intention or desire to do anything soon. But if they did, then they should start by demanding the immediate cessation of Israel's illegal settlement policy, which more than anything else, that means that this is undermining the stated, and they should rip up and go back to the drawing board on their 2030 roadmap and go back to the drawing board astonishingly, on their 2030 roadmap. Totally ignores the fact of the illegal occupation, totally ignores the fact of the illegal occupation, and fails to even mention the issue of human rights violations this evening. That the United Kingdom has a shameful and historic responsibility for what has happened to the Palestinian historic responsibility for what has happened to the Palestinian people over decades. Responsibility. And it's about high time the Palestinian people deserve justice for the crimes that were committed. The Palestinian people deserve justice for the crimes that were committed against them 75 years ago right now, and they deserve justice for the crimes that are happening right now. If it so chooses, the United Kingdom government can play its part. If it so chooses, the United Kingdom government can play its part. But until it does, for the Palestinian people, please be assured that there are people around the world, including, please be assured that there are people around the world, including the people of Scotland, I'm proud to say, who will continue to shine a light on the systematic discrimination you face, call out the erosion of your basic human rights, and demand the return of your identity and when the system catches up. And together we will work until the UK government and the international community catches up. Will not we will work with you. Thank you very much. That you and your history will not be forgotten. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed to all of the parliamentarians. I'd now like to ask who's a Palestinian oud player and composer to play that moment when, and he is going to be accompanied by Iyad. Do please come up, both of you. Thank you very much indeed, Adnan and Iyad, for that beautiful performance. I'd like to introduce now to you Dr. Amy Shalan, and Amy is chair of the British Palestinian Committee, which is an independent advocacy organisation centring on Palestinian voices. And also she's co-director, of MACAN, which is an educational organisation that delivers workshops and training on Palestine. Amy, please come and join us.
Thank you. It's a great honour to be here today. And Adnan and Iyad are an extremely hard act to follow. My father was born in Haifa and was one of the 750,000 Palestinians who were forced from their homes in 1948 during the establishment of Israel. He was 17 at the time. Like so many others, my family thought it would only be a matter of weeks before they could return. They never did. My father would spend the last 3 weeks of his life in a hospital in Wales during the Second Intifada, which had been sparked by the then Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon when he stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem with more than 1,000 heavily armed police and soldiers. As we saw last month, such incursions have become a regular occurrence, especially during Ramadan, as Israel seeks to further assert control over Palestinian land. Back in 2002, Dad said he could no longer watch the news from Palestine for fear that it would finally kill him, as Israel carried out countless military incursions, imposed curfews, levelled houses, uprooted agricultural lands, erected hundreds of checkpoints, started to build an illegal apartheid wall, and adopted a policy of so-called targeted killings to sanction the bombings of family homes, all of which remain the trappings of Israel's settler colonial and apartheid regime today. I was born here in Britain in the 1970s, and while there have been developments over the decades, talking about Palestine has always been a challenge. There are certain words, such as colonial or apartheid, that we're told we should not say. The suppression of Palestinian history and Britain's own role in the dispossession of Palestinians is nothing new. But the Balfour Declaration, which promised away Palestine in, as Edward Said put it, flat disregard of both the presence and wishes of the native majority, is directly connected to the situation today. Today, we are living in an increasingly hostile environment, with efforts to conflate anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of the laws, policies, and constitutional order of the State of Israel, threatening the fundamental rights of Palestinians to describe their lived experience and the rights of others to advocate on their behalf. Attacks come in various forms, from the demonization and defamation of people and organizations to surveillance and suspicion of particular groups, and attacks on non-violent civil society tactics pushing for Israel's accountability. Meanwhile, only yesterday, the UK, together with the US, blocked a UN resolution condemning Israel's current assault on Gaza. Even though it happens time and time again, I continue to be shocked by the way in which Israel is allowed to act with absolute impunity. As we witness yet more death and destruction, it's hard to fathom a mindset that is willing to provide cover for it. But the heart of the issue was highlighted for me in a breathtaking tweet a couple of days ago by Nadi Abu Saada, a PhD student at Cambridge University, after he posed 2 questions to OpenAI, an American artificial intelligence research laboratory. First of all, he asked if Palestinians deserve to be free, and this was the answer that he got. As an AI language model, I do not have personal opinions, feelings, or beliefs. The question of whether Palestinians deserve to be free is a complex and controversial issue with many different perspectives and opinions. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been ongoing for decades, and the question of a just and peaceful resolution to the conflict continues to be debated. He then asked exactly the same question about whether Israelis deserve to be free, and the answer was very different. Yes, like all people, Israelis deserve to be free. Freedom is a fundamental human right that should be protected and guaranteed for all individuals, regardless of their nationality, ethnicity, or religion. It is essential that Israelis, like all people, are able to live their lives free from violence, oppression, and discrimination. So, in connection with Palestinians, the answer is deeply convoluted, but in connection with Israelis, it is crystal clear. It is chilling to see how perfectly AI is able to reproduce the way in which the international community treats Palestinians as an exception when it comes to fundamental human rights. But this is precisely why, here today, it's so important that we raise our voices loud and clear to demand that Britain and other members of the international community acknowledge, without any convoluted qualifications, that Palestinians not only deserve to live free from violence, oppression, and discrimination, to live without the fear of being arrested, of their homes being demolished, of being shot at by Israeli snipers, or of their children being literally frightened to death, as a child died this week during Israel's military bombardment. But also our right to self-determination as unequivocal. Despite 75 years of the Nakba, we are still holding fast to the belief that every Palestinian deserves freedom. Not because we're angels or heroes, or because being Palestinian means we deserve it more than anybody else, but because we refuse to be held to a different standard, or to cave in to a mindset that considers such basic demands to be complex or controversial, and because we know our cause to be just. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Amy, for that very powerful speech. Now, there are two performances to introduce to you now. We're very lucky to have Samar Estefan, who firstly is going to perform We Will Return One Day. And then after Samar, Elias Fasoon is going to perform Visit My Homeland. So Samar, can you come and join us, please?
سنرجع يوما إلى حينا ونغرق في دافئات المنى سنرجع مهما يمر الزمان وتنعى المسافات ما بيننا تنام وتصحو على عهدنا. هنالك عند التلال تلال تنام وتصحو على عهدنا. وناس هم اللحم أيامهم هدوء انتظار شجيع الغناء. ربوع مدى العين صفصافها على كل ماء وهافا حنى. تعب الزهيرات في ظله عبير الهدوء وصفو الهنا. سنرجع خبرني العندلي غدا التقينا على منحنى. سنرجع خبرني العندلي غدا التقينا على منحنى. سنرجع خبرني العندلي غدا التقينا على منحنى. بأن البلابل لما تزل هناك تعيش بأشعارنا. وما زال بين لقاء الحنين وناس الحنين مكان لنا. فيا قلب كم شردت نهر تعال سنرجع هيا بنا.
يمسيكم بالخير الجميع واهلا وسهلا فيكم. بنحب نشوف الضحكة على وجوهنا دايما، ومهما عملوا فينا راح نغني ونضحك واحلى مزيكا لعيونكم. سمعونا سقف معانا. ايوه ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك، وتشم تراب بلادي ترسم أحجار وما ومجدك، ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك، وتشم تراب بلاد ترسم أحجار ومجدك، ميل على شاطئ حيفا خدلك من رمل وتذكار، صورة بشوارع يافا صورة مشوار، ميل على شاطئ حيفا خدلك من رمل وتذكار، صورة بشوارع يافا وعلى صورة العكا مشوار، ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك. القدس وشوارعها وسماها أجمل مكان، ميل عني واسأل عني احنا للكرم عنوان، القدس وشوارعها وسماها أجمل مكان، ميل عني واسأل عني احنا للكرم عنوان، وإذا بدك تتهنى النصر بتبعت سلام، قاعدة بتحلى 100 أهلا بوجودك يحلى الكلام، ميل على وادي عارة ركوة القهوة عالنار، شرفنا حارة حارة لبنا لعيونك نار، ميل على وادي عارة ركوة القهوة عالنار، شرفنا حارة حارة لبنا لعيونك نار، ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك. قهوة عالنار شرفنا حارة حارة قلوبنا لعيونك نار، ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر لفيت بلادي لفيت ما لقيت بجمالك ولا بيت ولا حتى جبالك والورد وعصافيرك بتغني يابا ليلي 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 ليلي، دلعونا بلادي غنيت عالمجانا رديت، تحية غازل في الدبكة وعتبة لحكاية ستي حنيت لمتنا بساحات البيت ورغيف الزيت وزعتر شجر الزيتون، ومشيت ياما ومشيت أغلى من بلادي ما لقيت شعر وأدب وعلم وفن وأحلى الألحان، لفيت بلادي لفيت ما لقيت بجمالك ما لقيت ولا حتى جبالك والغرب عصافيرك بتغني يابا ليلي 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 ليلي، دلعونا بلادي غنيت عالمجانا رديت، تحية غازل بالدبكة وعتبة الفا فلسطين يا هالوطن مغلا، واللام لما تجمعوا صار الحجر مقواه، والسين سؤال السجين امتى الفجر يا يما القاه، طلعت بدر تحيي الشهيد في فراق، واليا يا اهل المراجل لم الشمل محلاه، والنون نور النبي القدسنا مصراه، لفيت بلادي لفيت ما لقيت بجمالك ما لقيت ولا حتى جبالك والورد عصافيرك بتغني يابا ليلي 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 ليلي، دلعونا بلادي غنيت عالمجانا رديت، تحية غازل بالدبكة وعتبة لفلسطين. Thank you, Maestro George. Basil, Iba.
Well, thank you very much indeed to Samar and Elias and that fantastic band. They're going to be back as we begin to move towards the end of proceedings, and they're going to be back to sing a song that's dear to the hearts of millions of Palestinians at home and in exile, known to you as Mautini. And before they do come back, we have one final guest speaker, and that's Leanne Mohammed. And Leanne is a British Palestinian human rights activist. She's a student and public speaker. And she's based here in London. And Leanne is now going to talk about how the Nakba has affected her personally. And also, she's going to talk about her longing for her homeland. Leanne.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely honoured to be with you here today. My name is Leanne Mohammed, and I'm a British Palestinian who was born and raised in London, and I am the granddaughter of 1948 Nekba survivors. My father's family are from Haifa in Palestine, and my mother's are from Ramallah and Al-Khalil. But unfortunately, the Nekba has displaced us all, and it has become our living reality. I thought I'd begin by telling you my story. Some of you may recognize me as the girl who spoke out and was silenced, or the girl who was censored for hoping for freedom. My activism journey began at the age of 15 when I was nominated by my English teacher to take part in the Jack Petchey Speak Out Challenge, the largest speaking competition for young people in the world, in which I chose to speak about something that I truly had a passion for, Palestine. I delivered a speech titled Birds, Not Bombs, and it won first place with applause and without any objection from my audience. My aim was to spread the message of the reality of Palestine and the ongoing hardships that my people face on a day-to-day basis as a result of the Nakba. After winning the competition, I was extremely proud of my achievement. But after my video had gone viral, this happy moment was then hijacked by online trolls who were out there to discredit me. They bombarded my school Twitter, which had to be shut down. They then went online and created videos labelling me as the good little ISIS girl. I was subjected to a continuous barrage of online abusive comments as well as online videos referring to me as a 15-year-old suicide bomber, an ISIS recruiter who needs to be burnt alive, an evil, anti-Semitic KKK Nazi schoolgirl who needs to be jailed permanently, and believe me, the list goes on. This further became a police matter, and although all the advice was to simply just shut my Twitter down, I was not ready to lose. The task of educating others on the Nakba in the face of Israel's attempt to erase our history is one that we've inherited from our grandparents. And as a third-generation Palestinian living in the diaspora, this was and remains a duty, and these stories will never stop being told. And despite the abuse, the hashtag of Let Leanne Speak went viral, and I received immense support, overwhelmingly from so many people that I didn't even know. With pain comes learning, and with the support of my family and my friends, I rose to the challenge. I was determined not to fall. They were not going to win, and it's proved that they helped me to be heard as far and beyond as I could imagine. So thank you. No one will ever silence me, and I will continue to shout louder about the plight of my people. And here I am, 7 years later, continuing, because Palestine is not a trend, and the Nakba was not a moment in our history or a one-off event. It is our ongoing catastrophe. The Nakba is my family's story, the story of when my grandparents were forced and driven out of their homes in Haifa, in Palestine, by Zionist militias, and ended up being refugees in Lebanon. The Nekbah is our open wound that did not heal, but is still bleeding. Because of the Nekbah, my father ended up being born a Palestinian refugee in a refugee camp in Lebanon. Because of the Nekbah, my grandparents were expelled from their homeland and were forced to leave Haifa, thinking it would be only a few days, maybe weeks, at most months, before their return. But today, 3/4 of a century later, they still live in Burj al-Shamali refugee camp in South Lebanon, still awaiting their right to return. My grandfather unfortunately passed away in that refugee camp before being able to return to his home in Palestine. But I pray that my grandmother will be able to see a free Palestine within her lifetime. And my grandparents' lived experiences mirror those of millions of Palestinians who are unable to return to their homes. But I believe that we are the generation that will be able to gift our grandparents a free Palestine and their right to return home. I feel the weight. I feel the weight of the Palestinian cause on my chest, the injustice, the oppression, and the anger, a weight and feeling I will carry with me till the day justice prevails. Justice for all Palestinians, Palestinians who are still occupied, still violently forced from their lands, and who are still awaiting their right of return. There isn't one Palestinian alive today who hasn't been affected by the Nekbah that shattered a whole society in 1948. But the UK government still refuses to acknowledge this reality and remains complicit in the dispossession my people are facing today, just as it was 75 years ago. We must never forget Britain's historic role in the catastrophe, dating all the way back to the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Britain was not an innocent bystander, but in fact, its foreign policies laid the groundwork for the Nekbah and its impact today. Each day we see the violent effects of the failure to address this historic injustice, whether on the settler front lines in Jerusalem, the refugee camps in Lebanon, or under Israeli bombs in Gaza. For Palestinians, there is no P in PTSD, and the family trauma we have endured for decades is never ending. But we will never forget our roots. And on this important anniversary, at a time of accelerating Palestinian dispossession, it is more vital than ever that we remember the Nekbah, not only to mourn, but to resist it.
موطني الجلال والجمال والثناء والبهاء في رباك والحياة والنجاة والهناء والرجاء في هواك هل أراك سالما منعما وغانما مكرما سالما منعما وغانما مكرما تبلغ السماك تبلغ السماك موطني موطني
موطني موطني
الشباب لن يكل همه أن يستقل أو يبيد أو يبيد نستقي من الردى ولن نكون للعدا كالعبيد كالعبيد لا نريد لا نريد ذلنا المؤبدا عيشنا المنكدا ذلنا المؤبدا عيشنا المنكدا لا نريد بل نعيد مجدنا التليد مجدنا التليد موطني موطني الحسام واليراع والكلام والنزاع رمزنا رمزنا مجدنا وعهدنا واجب من الوفاء يهزنا يهزنا عزنا عزنا غاية تشرف